I'm Frederica Freiberg. Tonight, Wisconsin Responds, a Here and Now special. We're bringing you an hour tonight on outcry over the death of George Floyd by a Minneapolis police officer. We speak with community leaders, organizers, and lawmakers about their local perspectives on the national conversation. It's Here and Now for June 5. Rallies and protests spread across Wisconsin over the death of George Floyd, who died under the knee of a Minneapolis police officer now being charged with second-degree murder. Protesters taking to the streets daily, chanting, holding signs, and even shutting down highways to spread their message to end police brutality against African Americans. Various acts of vandalism, looting, and fires occurred, some say by protesters and some say by agitators. Some days there was no visible police presence, while on many other days police in riot gear broke up crowds with tear gas, pepper spray, and rubber bullets. On Sunday, Governor Tony Evers activated the National Guard to assist local law enforcement across the state. As to law enforcement, police reform is an immediate action item. Advocacy groups have released lists of demands on that front. More than 65 organizations co-signed such a list published by the African American Roundtable in Milwaukee. It includes calling for police to stop using rubber bullets and tear gas on protesters, doing away with curfews, withdrawing the National Guard, and shifting funds away from the police and putting that money toward health and housing initiatives. Joining me now is Angela Lang, Executive Director of Black Leaders Organizing Communities, or BLOC. She joins us from Milwaukee. Why has every state in the nation and Wisconsin risen up to protest the killing of George Floyd?
It's like a soda can that's just been shaken up for years and decades, and with no real tangible solutions in ways for real, truly policy reform. To me, I feel like this was only a matter of time.
Because what does Floyd's death represent?
His death, and quite frankly, his murder is really a symbolic of how Black people and brown people are viewed in this country and the stereotypes and threats that people think and impose on us.
How exhausting is it for you and others to fight the same fight over and over again?
It's incredibly exhausting. It's draining. It's traumatizing. It's triggering. It's emotional. Being honest, I cried a lot this last week and a half. Last weekend, I needed to turn my phone off and take a mental health break. I woke up Friday at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning and seeing Donald Trump's tweets about if the looting starts shooting. All of that is incredibly dangerous and frightening for communities of color. And I think we're living on this precipice right now that it is so much bigger than George Floyd. I think people are really starting to understand that this is a systemic problem, and this may have been the catalyst and the spark for that change, but people are really peeling back the layers in the historical context of everything that brought us to this point. And so even if everything plays out the way that we want it to, we also need to make sure that we're making concrete reforms in the future to make sure that this is never something that can ever be allowed to happen again.
These words from Governor Tony Evers this week, quote, "We must reject the efforts of those who seek to undermine and distract from the pain of generations of injustice." He says, "We must condemn all those who encourage violence against Black lives. We must offer our compassion. We must offer our support. But most of all," he says, "we must offer our action." So the tangible action that you want to take comes in the form of a legislative bill that would make the primary duty of all law enforcement to preserve the life of all individuals, and that deadly force is to be used only as a last resort. Why is that what you call an important first step?
Obviously, the horrible murder that we saw in Minneapolis with George Floyd, and how that happened because there wasn't the accountability piece in place as it relates to police and relations and interactions with folks. And so yes, use of force is what we're looking for. It's an assembly bill. It's already there. It's really straightforward. It's about making sure those standards exist so that everybody, both the community and the police, know what is expected of them.
Well, what is your position on defunding the police and putting those funds toward things like public health, housing, or economic development on behalf of people of color?
Yeah, I've been asked that question a lot, and possibly even some of the folks you're talking to tonight are going to be talking about that. But if defunding means remove funding from police officers and the work that they're doing, the good work that they're doing, of course I'm not against that. Who's going to be arresting the person driving 100 miles an hour on the belt line, dead drunk? I mean, we have to have some police out there to help us get through these things. But if some of that money could be used differently around, as you talked about before, implicit bias training, psychological help for officers. They're working under traumatic circumstances all the time. Reappraising how that money is spent to help them become better police officers. I'm all for that. This is an issue that I have, it's been burning in my soul for years, and we have a good opportunity in the state of Wisconsin. People are protesting around some really important things, and I'm looking forward to delivering on some of the things they're interested in.
Our next guest is nationally recognized in the field of police reform. Noble Ray is the former chief of Madison Police and longtime officer. He is now a consultant for community and trust-based policing methods across the country. How well do you understand the anger of protesters marching in solidarity over racism and white supremacy as they mourn the death of another black man?
I understand it from different angles. I came up in Milwaukee. My parents and my family was very much involved with Father Grotby and the civil rights movement. And so that rings very, very strong for me. As a police officer, as one that has advocated for police, but also police reform, it hit me hard because all of those gains that we thought that we were making over the years, you know, and recognizing that trust can be lost in just one instant. So that was very difficult, but understanding that talking to community members, both here in Madison and across the nation, this is a real issue. It's been a real issue. And one of the things that I think we do by mistake in our profession is that if there is an absence of tension, or if people are not complaining to law enforcement, it sends a signal that things are okay. But in reality, this is a perfect example that things are not okay. The tension was out there. The frustration, the decades of frustration was out there. And then this was the match that really hit at the core of so many people. Now, this is different. I've been in a lot of protests. I mean, Madison is a state capital. This is not a protest. This is a movement.
What learned wisdom would you impart on current police officers?
Learned wisdom is this. I think policing has really evolved. I think we've made great strides. But the learned wisdom is that it's constant. We lose sometimes because we get caught up in the day-to-day push of things. I mean, we're out there fighting fires, and it is a difficult job. But the things that are important about our profession, building trust, connecting with people, procedural justice, the competency and the character that it takes to do this job, the guardianship which we're entrusted with, that takes work, and it's every day, and it's hard to do. And so that is something that we still have to emphasize.
So what is the situation on the ground with practicing cops, those still responding and engaging and making decisions? For that, we go to Green Bay and check in there with the Chief of Police, Andrew Smith. And so if you had a refresher on use of force, what were the kind of most cogent takeaways from that for your officers?
Well, we gave them a kind of a little bit of an overview about why we're able to use force, under what situations force is appropriate. But also, we talked about the officer override. If you see another officer using force that's unauthorized or misapplying force, we believe it's the responsibility of those officers to stop that from happening. And that was reiterated along with the basic rules of, you don't put your knee on someone's neck, you don't put them down to the ground and hold them down pinned like that. And if somebody's gasping for air or calling for help, you take that as a serious incident and needs to be acted on.
Earlier this week, Marissa Wojcik sat down with the founder of Urban Triage and Madison organizer Brandy Grayson to hear what their demands are and what protests look and sound like on the ground.
If folks want this to end, then there has to be some changes. I don't see it stopping until some real actionable steps happen. This is historical. There is a revolution happening and taking place across our country. I don't see it ending. I see it increasing until real actionable steps are taken to end the violence against Black bodies at the hands of our police state. And again, our people in charge that have power, they have the power to end this at any moment. So the question really is when the protesters are going to stop. The question is, when are those in charge and in power going to start doing things to protect Black bodies?
A man who has made bridging gaps and bringing communities together his life's work describes the protests and riots as the voices of those who are fed up around the country, who are marginalized on their jobs, priced out of their neighborhoods, overcharged for payday loans, and over-policed. Michael Johnson, president and CEO of the Boys and Girls Club of Dane County, joins us now. There's been a lot of talk on this program and others about the use of force protocol for police officers. But in your mind, is what happened in Minneapolis the symptom of something much deeper?
Yeah, I think we do have systemic racism in our country that we have to not only address. We talk a lot about racial disparities. We talk about systemic, racism. But what we don't do as a country is make the appropriate investment to address systemic racism. You can only address systemic racism as if you make it a financial priority. A lot of times, if you look at local municipalities, they talk about it. And then when you look at their municipal budgets, it just doesn't align with the plans.
What is your hope as we move forward from this?
I'm hoping that that what happened to George Floyd never happens again. What happened to Eric Garner in New York never happens again. I hope that we begin to really not only talk about diversity and inclusion, but we act it out. I hope as a state and as a nation that we make a priority people who live in marginalized communities. What you see in our country is a lot of built up anger from folks who have been marginalized. And it's going to take people that look like you and people that look like me and people who have influence to help change these critical issues that impact our country.
Today we are continuing a series that is reflecting on how local media has and is covering communities, racial injustice, inequity, policy, protests, policing, and more. These are all topics that have come up in conversations for many citizens, protesters, leaders, media professionals, all who just want to tell their own story. So joining me today is that unemployed editor from Kenosha News, as he will refer to himself, Daniel Thompson, a journalist who wasn't expecting to become the story when he quit the newspaper, and he's here to talk about his next endeavors in media. And Daniel, thanks for having this conversation today.
Oh, thank you for having me.
I want to start just kind of going back a few weeks. Can you describe for us what was happening, what you were seeing in Kenosha after Jacob Blake was shot and the unrest that followed?
You saw law enforcement almost arguably escalating the situation because there was one officer that put on riot gear. And that's the point that things started to go off the rails. Because the people that were peaceful in the crowd that were kind of controlling the situation were overtaken by the violent people once they saw that, oh, something might physically happen to us. Escalation. And that's what you honestly have been seeing in Kenosha and Kenosha County this entire time is escalation. In a time where badly Kenosha needs de-escalation and the nation needs de-escalation. We have irresponsible headlines that are escalating things. We have law enforcement officers and commanders, seeing as how Sheriff David Beth would have been the emergency commander in this situation when the EOC was activated, have decided to respond with brute force instead of actually talking to the people or listening. So that's escalated things. And then we had a call out because of that escalation for armed militia, which led to a 17-year-old person from out of my city, out of my state, coming in and killing two of my people. Two of my people in my streets. Two people that weren't doing anything. Two people that didn't deserve for that to happen, who were in a tense situation and doing what they thought was best to protect the people they cared about around them. And they were murdered because of this escalation. And you can see as I talk about it, what happens is that I start getting upset because it's difficult to watch a situation boiling over when there are so many people that could cool it down, but they don't. And that's kind of where Kenosha is at right now, is that there are so many people who want change. There are so many people who want things to be different. But is leadership actually going to do it?
How do you feel when you read accounts of some of these protests? Do you feel like they were characterized accurately at all? Or do you think that headlines and ways that it was written about or portrayed seem to show things as a spectacle or escalate the violence further?
The Black Lives Matter movement, these movements are deemed as quote unquote terrorist organizations, right? I mean, it's ridiculous the fact that people who stand up to protest, normally Black and brown communities, when that happens, that you meet the most stigmatized oppression in targeting the message against what it is that these movements are actually about. So it doesn't surprise me for people to try to deem what's happening in media as something that's against the police or something that want to dismantle this whole governmental system and turn them into and deem these movements as terrorist organizations. I think really what people want is people want to see a government that's fair, that's balanced, and that's growing. Right? We know that policing started off of slavery with slave catching. The foundation of it, right? So people want to see policing not be used in those same tactics anymore, but want to see a more universal approach to how policing and how officers are held accountable. So that's what I feel is happening in the media in terms of stigmatizing the movement, stigmatizing organizations that's standing up to exercise their constitutional rights.
Are there specific ways that you would like to see media change in doing this? And also, when people are consuming media about activism and protests or even interactions between the community and the police, what do you want people consuming media to think about before making a judgment on the information that they're getting?
Take everything with a grain of salt. There's two sides, there's three sides actually to every story. You have your side, you have my side, then you have the middle, you have the truth, right? And one of the things that I learned just in life is everybody's perspective is real to a degree, right? So you may view something from one angle, right? That may be true to a degree. I may view something from another angle, and that may be true to a degree. But then we have our facts, right? We have the actual basis of things. And as Americans, as knowledgeable Americans, we all need to do a better job of going back to the facts and the actual basis of things instead of going with the first thing that we hear and running with it. We should take a grain of salt and we should really understand many different cultures and many different reasons of why people are um, asking for a better America. And I think once we do that, then we'll see the changes that we really need to change in order to get there.
Do you think the perspectives of communities that the media says that they report on and they represent, do you think that they're an accurate representation? And I mean, would you separate public media from commercial media? I mean, there's so many forms of media today. It almost warrants kind of disseminating which one we're talking about.
I think it really depends on the community that's being portrayed. I was on Nicollet and 8th about 2 weeks ago when some of the riots started popping off. I was there and saw it for myself. Now, the next day, obviously, TPT doesn't report anything on it, but WCCO had a certain way of reporting on it. KSTP had a certain way of reporting on it, but you don't really know what's happening until you actually see it for yourself, you know? And so I think one way to report is to show and not tell. And a lot of media companies have been telling you what you're seeing when really a lot of people are smart enough to understand what they're seeing anyways. And even when we saw the video of George Floyd being murdered by 4 Minneapolis police officers, we didn't really need to be told what was happening. We knew, you know, what was going on. And so I think through public media, I think what you're getting at is a lot of these media outlets are majority white. And so the trust is tough to be activated there when you know that the foundation is white. And so moving from there, it's tough to trust what's coming out of the mouths of these media outlets when they're reporting on Black folks, Indigenous folks, and people of color. What I think needs to change specifically is when you see other media news outlets like CNN or Fox, you kind of know what you're going to get. But for public media, the toxic and very dangerous and poisonous problem with public media and PBS is that it's portraying itself as welcoming. However, it is telling a narrative that's painful, that's hurtful, and that is manipulating what people of color look like. So, but it's saying that, but hey, I'm being nice and we're all welcoming here. I would rather somebody be upfront to my face and say, hey, we're going to do A, B, and C, and then at the end of the day, you get A, B, and C. Whereas with public media, you say, hey, we're gonna be objective, nonpartisan, and then you get white, Black History Month. Yeah, Ken Burns, documentary on Black folks. Hey, and it's like, wait, what? So I think that's a dangerous thing to run because you're saying that you're representing the public when in fact you're representing the white public.